The air conditioner in my car had died somewhere in the flatlands of eastern Colorado, a final, rattling sigh before it started blowing hot, dusty air that smelled of defeat. It was the third thing to break in as many weeks. First the job, then the lease, now the one piece of machinery that made driving through the sun-bleached guts of the country in July even remotely tolerable. I was adrift, a man whose life had been neatly packed into a sedan that was now actively trying to cook him alive. My destination was a vague concept, a direction more than a place. West, just west, until the landscape or my dwindling bank account told me to stop. By the time the sun began its slow, merciless descent, painting the sky in violent shades of orange and purple, I was desperate. My shirt was plastered to my back, and my head throbbed in time with the engine's weary rhythm. Then I saw it. A flicker of neon against the deepening twilight. A single, sputtering sign that read, Starlight Motel beneath it, in a less confident buzz, vacancy. It was a lie, but I did not know it yet. The motel looked like a place that time had not so much forgotten as actively abandoned. A long, single-story block of rooms, painted a faded seafoam green that was peeling in long, curling strips. A few plastic chairs, sun-bleached and forgotten, sat like lonely sentinels outside the doors. The office was a small, separate building with a large picture window, through which I could see the silhouette of a man. Hope, a feeling I had not entertained in days, flickered weakly in my chest. I parked the car, the gravel crunching loudly in the profound silence of the evening. The air outside was thick and heavy, smelling of dust and distant rain that would never arrive. I pushed open the office door, a small bell announcing my arrival with a cheerful jingle that felt entirely out of place. The man inside did not look up immediately. He was leaning over a large, leather-bound book, his focus absolute. The office was clean but sparse, smelling of lemon polish and old paper. A rack of faded postcards stood by the counter, depicting local attractions that had probably ceased to exist decades ago. When he finally did look up, the world seemed to slow for a beat. He was older than me, maybe by a decade, putting him somewhere in his late 30s. His hair was dark and cut short, and a day's worth of stubble shadowed a strong jaw. But it was his eyes that held me. They were a deep, clear gray, the color of a stormy sky, and they seemed to see more than they let on. He had the stillness of a man completely at home in his own skin, a concept that felt as foreign to me as breathing underwater. "Help you?" His voice was low, a gravelly rumble that seemed to vibrate in the small space. "I need a room," I said, my own voice sounding thin and reedy. "Just for the night." He leaned back, his gaze sweeping over me once, a quick, efficient appraisal that took in my sweat-stained shirt and the exhaustion etched onto my face. He did not smile. He did not offer any false platitudes of welcome. He just looked, his expression unreadable. "No vacancy," he said. The words were flat, final. My flicker of hope died instantly. I glanced back out the window at the empty parking lot, at the dark, silent doors of the motel rooms. "Are you sure?" I asked, unable to keep the desperation from my voice. "The sign's broken," he stated, his gaze unwavering. "Has been for years." I felt a wave of despair so profound it was almost comical. Of course the sign was broken. Of course this oasis was a mirage. I was doomed to be boiled alive in my rolling metal prison. I must have looked as pathetic as I felt, because something in his expression shifted. It was not pity, not exactly. It was something more complex, a flicker of consideration in those storm-gray eyes. "My car's air conditioning is shot," I blurted out, the words spilling before I could stop them. "I've been driving for 10 hours. I'll take anything. A broom closet. Your couch." He was silent for a long moment, his eyes still locked on mine. I could hear the hum of the ancient refrigerator behind the counter, the frantic beat of a moth against the window pane. I felt stripped bare under his gaze, my desperation a raw, open wound. He was not just looking at me. He was reading me, deciphering the story of my flight in the lines around my eyes. Then, he reached under the counter. My heart gave a painful lurch. He brought out a single, old-fashioned brass key attached to a large plastic fob with the number 7 etched into it. He did not slide it across the counter. He held it, his knuckles resting on the worn wood. "I have one room," he said, his voice even lower than before. "It's complicated." I did not care about complicated. I would have taken a room haunted by the ghosts of 1,000 murdered salesmen if it meant a bed and a working shower. I'll take it, I said, probably too quickly. He watched me for another beat, then pushed the key forward. His fingers brushed mine as I took it, a brief, dry heat that sent a jolt up my arm. It was nothing, a meaningless, accidental contact, but my skin tingled where he had touched it. Room 7, he said, his expression giving nothing away. End of the row. The air conditioner is loud, but it's cold. Thank you. I breathed, the words heavy with a relief so potent it made my knees feel weak. I fumbled for my wallet, pulling out my credit card. He held up a hand. Cash only. 75. I paid him, the worn bills feeling flimsy and insignificant in the charged space between us. He took the money without a word, his movements economical and precise. There was no registration card to sign, no request for identification. It was a transaction stripped down to its barest essentials, a key for cash, a room for a ghost. As I turned to leave, his voice stopped me. The ice machine is broken, too. I turned back. A ghost of a smile touched the corner of his mouth, a fleeting, almost imperceptible thing. It transformed his face, hinting at a warmth buried deep beneath the stoic surface. Of course it is, I said, and for the first time in a long time, I felt the pull of a genuine smile on my own lips. He just nodded, that little smile vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. He turned his attention back to the large ledger on the counter, a clear dismissal. The brief connection, if it had ever existed, was severed. I walked out into the heavy evening air, the brass key feeling impossibly heavy in my palm. The complication, I was beginning to suspect, had very little to do with the room itself. Room 7 was exactly what I expected, and for that, I was grateful. It was a study in beige and brown, furnished with a sturdy bed, a scarred wooden dresser, and a small table with a single chair. The air was stale, but as promised, the window unit roared to life with a shuddering groan when I turned it on, blasting a stream of glorious, ice-cold air into the room. I dropped my bag on the floor and stood in front of the vent for a full minute, letting the cold seep into my clothes, into my skin, a baptism of relief. The bathroom was small, with cracked linoleum and a shower that produced a stream of water with all the pressure of a gentle sigh. But the water was hot. I stood under it until my skin was pink, washing away the grime and sweat of the road, trying to wash away the feeling of being unmoored, of floating through a life that no longer felt like my own. When I was done, I wrapped a thin, clean towel around my waist and looked at my reflection in the fogged-up mirror. I looked haggard, thinner than I had been a month ago, with dark circles under my eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and endless miles. I looked like a man on the run, which was, in essence, exactly what I was. I fell into the bed, the mattress groaning in protest. It was firm, the sheets crisp and smelling faintly of bleach. Through the thin walls, I could hear the cacophony of the high desert night, the chirping of crickets, the distant howl of a coyote, the low rumble of a truck on the highway. And beneath it all, the steady, rhythmic roar of the air conditioner, a mechanical lullaby. I thought of the man in the office, with his quiet intensity and storm-gray eyes. Cole. I had seen his name on a small, engraved plate on the counter. Cole. The name suited him. It felt solid, earthy, grounded. Everything I was not. Sleep did not come easily. My mind, finally given a moment of stillness, began to race. It replayed the last few weeks, the humiliating meeting with my boss, the sterile emptiness of my apartment as I packed my life into boxes, the long, lonely hours on the road. I was running from the ghost of a life I had tried so hard to build, a life that had crumbled with astonishing speed. A career, a partner who had left 6 months prior, a carefully constructed facade of normalcy. It had all been a house of cards, and a single gust of wind had brought it all down. I got up and walked to the window, peering through the gap in the cheap curtains. The office light was still on, a solitary beacon in the vast darkness. I could see him, a dark shape moving behind the glass. What was he doing in there at this hour? What kind of man chose to chain himself to a decaying relic in the middle of nowhere? The questions were a welcome distraction from my own miserable thoughts. I watched him for a long time, this stranger who had granted me sanctuary. He moved with a kind of unhurried purpose, a man comfortable with solitude. I felt a strange kinship with him, a shared sense of isolation, though his seemed chosen, while mine felt like a punishment. Eventually, the light in the office went out, plunging the world outside my window into absolute blackness, save for the indifferent glitter of the stars. I went back to bed, and this time, sleep finally took me. I woke up to the aggressive brightness of the morning sun forcing its way through the curtains. For a moment, I had no idea where I was. The unfamiliar room, the roar of the air conditioner, the scent of bleach. Then it all came flooding back. The drive, the heat, the motel. Cole. I showered and dressed in the last of my clean clothes. The thought of getting back into my sweltering car and driving into another day of oppressive heat was exhausting. I found myself looking for excuses to linger. I needed coffee. Surely there was a place to get coffee. I stepped outside into the dry, clean air of the morning. The motel looked slightly less forlorn in the daylight, the peeling paint just a sign of character rather than decay. Down at the end of the row, a door I had not noticed last night was propped open. It led to a small laundry room. And standing inside, his back to me, was Cole. He was folding sheets, his movements economical and precise. He wore a simple gray t-shirt that stretched across the solid muscles of his back and shoulders, and a pair of worn jeans that hung low on his hips. He moved with an easy, physical confidence that I found myself envying. My own body always felt like an awkward collection of limbs I was not quite sure what to do with. His seemed to be an extension of his will, capable and sure. I stood there for a moment, just watching him. The simple domesticity of the act was disarming. This was not just the stoic, unreadable manager from the office. This was a man who folded his own laundry, who ran this entire place on his own. I wondered what he thought about as he performed these mundane tasks. Did he think about the ghosts who passed through his rooms, men like me, running from their own lives? Or did his thoughts remain as self-contained as he was? He must have sensed me standing there, because he turned, a stack of perfectly folded white sheets in his arms. Those gray eyes landed on me, and for a moment, they held no expression at all. Then, that same ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Morning," he said, his voice a low rumble in the quiet air. "Morning," I replied, feeling oddly self-conscious. "I was just wondering if there's a place to get coffee around here." He gestured with his head toward the office. "I've got a pot on. It's not fancy, but it's hot." "I'm not fancy," I admitted. That earned me another flicker of a smile. "Come on then." He led the way to the office, and I followed, feeling like a stray dog being offered a scrap of kindness. He unlocked a door behind the main counter that I had assumed was a storage closet. It opened into a small, tidy apartment. A compact kitchen, a worn but comfortable-looking armchair, and a small table. It was Spartan, but it was a home. The air smelled of coffee and something else, something uniquely him. A faint, clean scent of soap and warm skin. He poured coffee into 2 thick ceramic mugs, the dark liquid steaming in the cool morning air of the office. He handed one to me, his fingers brushing mine again. This time, the contact felt less accidental, more deliberate. Or maybe I was just projecting my own desperate need for connection onto a simple gesture. I was an expert at that. "Thanks," I said, wrapping my hands around the warm mug. He leaned against the counter, cradling his own mug. He did not ask what I was doing here, where I was going, where I had come from. The silence between us was not awkward. It was comfortable, weighted. He seemed to be a man who understood the value of not asking questions. He let people keep their stories to themselves. "You're the first guest I've had in a month," he said, his eyes on the murky depths of his coffee. "Really?" I asked, surprised. "But the sign." "Like I said, the sign's broken." He took a sip of his coffee. "I keep the place clean. Fix what breaks. But I don't go looking for business. Most people just drive on by." "Why?" The question was out before I could stop it. It felt too personal, too intrusive. He looked up at me then, his gaze direct. "It's quiet," he said, as if that explained everything. And in a way, it did. I understood the appeal of quiet. I had been chasing it for 1,000 miles. We drank our coffee in silence for a few minutes. I found myself studying him over the rim of my mug, the way a stray lock of dark hair fell across his forehead, the network of fine lines around his eyes, suggesting he spent a lot of time squinting into the sun, or that he had smiled more in a previous life. The stillness of his hands as they held his mug. He was a puzzle, and every piece I uncovered only made me more curious about the whole. "So," he said, breaking the silence, his voice casual. "What's broken on your car?" "The air conditioner," I said. "Gave up the ghost yesterday afternoon." He nodded slowly. "There's a mechanic in the next town over. About 20 miles east. Name's Gus. He's slow and he's expensive, but he's honest." East. The direction I had just come from. The thought of backtracking, of losing a day, felt like a defeat. I must have let my frustration show on my face. "Or," he said, his voice dropping a little, a hint of something unreadable in his tone, "you could stay another day. Rest up. It's supposed to be 110 today. Not a good day to be on the road with no air." The offer hung in the air between us. It was a practical suggestion, a piece of sensible advice. But it felt like more than that. It felt like an invitation. A lifeline. The thought of staying, of spending another day in the quiet orbit of this man, was more tempting than it had any right to be. "I don't know," I said, my voice hesitant. I should probably get going. The words were a lie, a reflexive defense against the terrifying possibility of wanting something. He just looked at me, his gray eyes steady. He did not push. He did not try to convince me. He simply held my gaze, letting the silence stretch. In that silence, I felt the truth of my own situation. I had nowhere to be, no one waiting for me. I was a ship without a rudder, and he was offering a temporary harbor. "Okay," I said, the word a quiet surrender. "Okay, I'll stay." A slow nod. That was it. No smile, no sign of satisfaction. But I thought I saw a flicker of something in his eyes, a brief, fleeting warmth before the shutters came down again. "Good," he said. He finished his coffee and placed the mug in the small sink behind the counter. "Let me know if you need anything." And with that, he was gone, back through the door into his apartment, leaving me alone in the office with my coffee and a head full of confusing thoughts. I had a feeling that needing anything from Cole would be a very complicated proposition indeed. I spent the day in a state of suspended animation. I retreated to my room, the roaring air conditioner a constant companion. I tried to read the paperback I had brought with me, but the words swam on the page, unable to hold my attention. My thoughts kept drifting back to Cole, to the easy confidence of his movements, the quiet rumble of his voice, the unnerving intensity of his gaze. From my window, I watched him work. He was a man in constant, purposeful motion. He replaced a broken screen on the window of room 3. He pulled weeds from the sad-looking flower beds that lined the walkway. He climbed a ladder and wrestled with the sputtering neon of the vacancy sign, his muscles straining against the fabric of his shirt. I watched him, hidden behind my curtain like a spy, and felt a strange, unfamiliar ache in my chest. It was a mix of loneliness and longing, a yearning for the kind of simple, grounded purpose he seemed to embody. Late in the afternoon, I saw him sit down on the small porch of the office, a bottle of water in his hand. He was shirtless now, his skin tanned and slick with sweat. He tilted his head back, drinking deeply, the muscles in his throat working. I found myself unable to look away. He was beautiful, in a rugged, unadorned way. He was a man carved from the rock and dust of the landscape around him. My heart was pounding, a frantic, panicked rhythm against my ribs. What was happening to me? I had been numb for so long, encased in a protective shell of apathy. But this man, this quiet stranger in the middle of nowhere, was chipping away at it with every small gesture, every fleeting glance. I was terrified, and I was intrigued. I forced myself away from the window. I had to do something, anything, to break the spell. I decided to walk. I had no destination in mind. I just needed to move, to feel the ground under my feet. I walked out past the edge of the motel property, onto a dusty track that led out into the desert. The heat was a physical presence, a heavy blanket that smothered the world in a shimmering haze. The silence was absolute, broken only by the crunch of my own footsteps and the whisper of the wind. The landscape was stark and beautiful, a vast expanse of sand and scrub and distant, hazy mountains. It was a place that did not care about my small, insignificant problems. There was a comfort in that. I walked for what felt like hours, until the sun began to dip towards the horizon, and the heat finally began to lose its edge. When I turned back, I could see the motel, a tiny outpost of civilization in the vast emptiness. And I could see him, a solitary figure, standing by the road, watching me. My first thought was a jolt of alarm. Had he been worried? Had he come looking for me? The idea was both absurd and strangely touching. As I got closer, I could see that his expression was unreadable, his arms crossed over his chest. He just stood there, waiting, a solid, unmovable presence. "Got lost?" he asked as I approached, his voice neutral. "No," I said, my throat dry from the dust and the heat. "Just walking." He nodded, his gaze sweeping over me, taking in my flushed face and dusty clothes. "It's easy to get turned around out here," he said. It was not an accusation, just a statement of fact. "I'm fine," I insisted, though my legs were aching and I was desperately thirsty. He did not argue. He just turned and started walking back towards the motel. I fell into step beside him. We walked in silence for a few minutes, the setting sun casting our long shadows ahead of us. "There's a storm coming," he said, his eyes on the horizon. "You can smell it." I sniffed the air. It smelled the same as it always had, of dust and dry heat. But he seemed to have a connection to this place, an understanding of its rhythms and secrets that I could not begin to fathom. When we got back to the motel, he gestured towards the office porch. "Sit," he said. It was not a request. He disappeared into his apartment and came back a moment later with 2 bottles of ice-cold beer. He handed one to me, the condensation cool against my hot skin. He sat down in one of the plastic chairs, not next to me, but in the one across from me, creating a small, intimate space between us. He took a long drink from his beer, his eyes closing for a moment in satisfaction. "Thanks," I said, taking a sip of my own. The beer was crisp and cold, a perfect antidote to the lingering heat of the day. We sat in a comfortable silence as the last of the light bled from the sky. The first stars began to appear, impossibly bright in the absence of city lights. The wind picked up, a cool breeze that rustled the dry leaves of the cottonwood tree behind the office. And in it, I could finally smell what he had smelled. A faint, clean scent of ozone and wet earth. The promise of rain. "You were a long way out," he said, his voice quiet. "I needed the space," I said, the admission surprising me. He nodded, as if he understood. "This place has a lot of that." I looked at him, his profile a dark silhouette against the deepening twilight. "Why are you here, Cole?" I asked, the question I had been wanting to ask all day. "Really?" He was silent for a long time, so long that I thought he was not going to answer. He took another slow drink of his beer, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "I used to build things," he said finally, his voice soft. "Skyscrapers. Big, shiny things that scraped the sky. I had a wife, a corner office, a life that looked good on paper." He paused, and in the silence, I could hear the weight of everything he was not saying. "One day, I just stopped. I walked away from all of it. Drove until I ran out of road. Ended up here." He turned to look at me then, and in the dim light, I could see a flicker of something raw and vulnerable in his eyes. This place was falling apart. The roof leaked, the plumbing was a mess. It needed fixing. I'm good at fixing things. It was the most he had said to me, the first real glimpse behind the stoic facade. He was not just hiding here. He was healing. He was taking something broken and making it whole, and in doing so, perhaps he was doing the same for himself. "What about you, Leo?" he asked, his voice gentle. "What are you running from?" The question hung in the air between us, as charged and potent as the coming storm. I opened my mouth to give him the easy answer, the lie I had been telling myself for weeks. But looking into his steady, knowing eyes, I found I could not. "Myself, I think," I said, the words a quiet, painful truth. He just nodded, a slow, deep acknowledgement. He did not offer platitudes. He did not tell me it would be okay. He just sat with me in the darkness, a silent witness to my confession, and in that moment, I felt less alone than I had in years. The storm broke just after midnight. It was not the gentle rain I had imagined, but a violent, furious deluge. The wind howled, rattling the windows in their frames, and lightning split the sky, followed by claps of thunder so loud they seemed to shake the very foundations of the motel. And then, the power went out. One moment, the room was bathed in the steady glow of the bedside lamp and the roar of the air conditioner. The next, there was only profound darkness and a sudden, deafening silence. The absence of the air conditioner's drone was more jarring than the storm itself. I lay in bed, my heart pounding in my chest. The darkness was absolute, disorienting. The heat, which had been held at bay by the valiant efforts of the window unit, began to creep back into the room almost immediately, thick and suffocating. The only light came from the brief, brilliant flashes of lightning, which illuminated the room in stark, ghostly detail for a split second at a time. I was not afraid of the storm. I was afraid of the silence, of the thoughts that were sure to rush in to fill the void. I was thinking of getting up, of fumbling for my phone to use as a flashlight, when there was a knock at my door. It was a soft, hesitant knock, almost lost in the roar of the wind and rain. For a moment, I thought I had imagined it. Then it came again, firmer this time. My heart leaped into my throat. It had to be Cole. Who else could it be? I swung my legs out of bed, my feet finding the cool floor. I fumbled my way to the door, my hands outstretched in the darkness. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding shaky. "Leo? It's Cole. You okay in there?" His voice was a low rumble, reassuringly solid against the chaos of the storm. "Yeah, I'm fine," I said, my hand finally finding the doorknob. I unlocked it and pulled it open. He was standing in the doorway, a dark silhouette against the storm-lit sky. He was holding an old-fashioned kerosene lantern, which cast a warm, flickering golden glow on his face. His hair was damp from the rain, and his t-shirt was plastered to his chest. He looked like a figure from another time, a keeper of a lonely lighthouse in a raging sea. "Power's out all the way to the highway," he said, his voice calm and steady. "Might be a while." "Okay," I said, not knowing what else to say. I was acutely aware that I was wearing nothing but a pair of thin cotton pajama pants, and that the air was suddenly thick with more than just humidity. He held up the lantern. "Figured you could use some light." His eyes met mine in the warm glow, and in that moment, the storm, the darkness, everything else seemed to fade away. There was just the two of us, standing in the doorway, surrounded by the flickering light. "Come in," I said, the words leaving my mouth before I had even consciously thought them. I stepped back, holding the door open. He hesitated for just a fraction of a second, his gaze searching mine, as if looking for something. Then he nodded and stepped inside, bringing the warm, dancing light with him. The room, which had felt so sterile and anonymous before, was transformed. The lantern cast long, soft shadows, making the small space feel intimate, like a secret cave hidden from the storm. He placed the lantern on the small table, then turned to face me. We were standing only a few feet apart, closer than we had ever been. I could smell the rain on his skin, a clean, earthy scent that mingled with his own. I could see the individual droplets of water clinging to his eyelashes. "It's getting hot in here already," I said, stating the obvious, just to fill the charged silence. "It'll cool down after the rain passes," he said, his voice quiet. He did not move away. He just stood there, watching me, his gray eyes dark and unreadable in the lantern light. My mind was a chaotic jumble of thoughts and feelings. Fear, desire, a desperate, aching loneliness. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, the wind at my back, pushing me forward. One step, and I would be falling. He must have seen the turmoil on my face, because his own expression softened. He reached out, his hand moving slowly, as if giving me time to pull away. He did not touch my face or my shoulder. He just gently took the beer bottle, which I had apparently been clutching since he knocked, from my nerveless fingers and set it down on the dresser. His fingers brushed against mine, a slow, deliberate contact that sent a shiver through my entire body. "Leo," he said, his voice barely a whisper. And in the way he said my name, I heard everything. The loneliness, the longing, the same fear and desire that were churning inside of me. He was on the edge of that cliff, too. This is it, the moment of truth. The world narrows to this small, warm space. His eyes, the scent of rain, the soft hiss of the lantern. I can feel the pull of him, a gravitational force I have no hope of resisting. My breath catches in my throat. He takes a small step closer. The space between us shrinks, becomes electric. He raises a hand, and this time he does touch me. His fingers, calloused and warm, brush against my jaw, a touch so gentle it is almost a question. I lean into it, a small, involuntary movement of surrender. My eyes flutter shut. And then his mouth is on mine. It is not a hard, demanding kiss. It is soft, hesitant, searching. It is a kiss that tastes of rain and beer and a loneliness so profound it breaks my heart. I respond with a desperation that surprises me, my hands coming up to grip his arms, holding on to him as if he is the only solid thing in a world that has come undone. The kiss deepens, becomes more confident. His other hand comes up to cup the back of my neck, his fingers tangling in my hair, pulling me closer. I can feel the solid, steady beat of his heart against my chest, a rhythm that seems to sync with my own frantic pulse. All the fear, all the uncertainty, all the pain of the last few months melts away in the heat of his touch. There is only this man, this moment. When we finally break apart, we are both breathless. We rest our foreheads together, the lantern light flickering on our faces. I can feel his warm breath on my lips. I open my eyes and find him already looking at me, his gray eyes dark with an emotion I cannot name. Complicated. I whisper, the word a faint echo of our first conversation. A small, wry smile touches his lips. I warned you, he murmurs, his voice thick. He kisses me again, and this time there is no hesitation. It is a kiss of acceptance, of recognition. It is the end of the running, the end of the loneliness. It is the beginning of something I do not have a name for yet, something fragile and terrifying and beautiful. And in the heart of the storm, in a forgotten motel at the edge of the world, I feel, for the first time in a very long time, like I might have finally found my way home. The storm passed as dawn approached, leaving behind a world washed clean. The air was cool and fresh, smelling of wet earth and creosote. The power was still out. We lay in the semi-darkness of my room, tangled together in the sheets, the kerosene lantern on the table now just a low, guttering flame. Cole's arm was a heavy, comforting weight across my chest, his head resting on my shoulder. I could feel the slow, steady rhythm of his breathing, a peaceful counterpoint to the frantic beating of my own heart. I had not slept. I had been too afraid that if I closed my eyes, I would wake up to find it had all been a dream, a hallucination brought on by heat and desperation. I had spent the hours just listening to him breathe, feeling the warmth of his skin against mine, committing every detail of the moment to memory. The way the faint light caught the sharp line of his jaw, the surprising softness of his hair against my cheek, the feeling of his hand resting possessively on my hip. I was terrified. A night of passion, fueled by a storm and shared loneliness, was one thing. The quiet intimacy of the morning after was another entirely. What happened now? What were the rules for this? Did I speak? Did I stay silent? Did he regret it? The questions circled in my mind, a flock of anxious vultures. He stirred, his breathing changing. I felt him press a soft, sleepy kiss to my shoulder, a gesture so simple and tender it made my throat ache. He lifted his head and looked at me, his gray eyes soft and clouded with sleep. "Morning," he murmured, his voice thick and raspy. "Morning," I whispered back, my own voice barely audible. He studied my face for a long moment, his expression unreadable. I felt my anxiety spike. This was it. This was the moment he would pull away, his face hardening back into the stoic mask of the motel manager. He would make a polite excuse, get dressed, and leave. And I would be alone again. Only this time the loneliness would be 1,000 times sharper, 1,000 times more painful, because now I knew what I was missing. But he did not pull away. Instead, he raised a hand and gently brushed a stray lock of hair from my forehead. His thumb traced the line of my eyebrow, a feather-light touch that sent a cascade of shivers down my spine. "You're an overthinker, aren't you?" he said, his voice a low, gentle rumble. It was not a question. I managed a weak, shaky smile. "Is it that obvious? I can practically hear the gears turning from here," he said, a ghost of a smile playing on his own lips. "Stop it." "Stop what?" "Worrying," he said simply. He leaned in and kissed me, a slow, deep, lazy morning kiss that tasted of sleep and intimacy. It was a kiss that held no questions, only answers. It was a kiss that said, "This is real. I'm still here. I'm not going anywhere." When he pulled back, he settled his head back onto my shoulder, his arm tightening around me. "The power will be back on by noon," he said, his voice casual, as if we were discussing the weather. "Gus, the mechanic, doesn't open until 9. We have time for coffee." His words were so simple, so mundane, but they were everything I needed to hear. He was not running. He was not treating last night as a mistake. He was talking about the future, even if it was just the next few hours. He was weaving me into the fabric of his morning, into the routine of his day. "You still have that pot?" I asked, my voice thick with an emotion I could not name. "Always," he said, his voice a warm hum against my skin. "It's not fancy, but it's hot." I closed my eyes, a profound sense of relief washing over me, so potent it felt like I might drown in it. "I'm not fancy," I whispered, the words a quiet echo of our conversation from the day before, a conversation that now felt like it had happened a lifetime ago. He was silent for a moment, and then I felt him press another kiss to my shoulder. "I know," he said softly. We stayed like that for a long time, listening to the world outside slowly come back to life. The first birds began to sing, their cheerful calls a stark contrast to the storm of the night before. A lone truck rumbled by on the highway, and in the quiet stillness of the room, wrapped in the arms of this stranger who no longer felt like a stranger at all, I allowed myself, for the first time, to simply be. Not to think, not to worry, not to plan my next escape. Just to be. And it was enough. Later, we sat at the small table in his apartment, drinking coffee from the same thick ceramic mugs. The power had flickered back on with a sudden jolt, and the hum of the refrigerator felt like an intrusion into the quiet world we had built. He had pulled on a pair of jeans, but his chest was still bare. I was wearing one of his gray t-shirts, which was far too big for me and smelled of him. It felt like a second skin. The awkwardness I had feared never materialized. Instead, there was a comfortable, easy silence between us. It felt as if we had been having coffee like this every morning for years. He told me about the motel, about the quirks of its ancient plumbing and the family of owls that lived in the old cottonwood tree. I told him about my job, about the sterile corporate world I had fled, about the feeling of being a square peg in a world full of round holes. We did not talk about last night. We did not need to. It was there in every glance, in every small gesture, in the way his knee brushed against mine under the table. Around 10, I reluctantly admitted that I should probably call the mechanic. The real world, with its broken air conditioners and its endless highways, was waiting. Cole just nodded. He got up and came back with a cordless phone, placing it on the table in front of me. He looked at me, his gray eyes steady. "You don't have to go," he said, his voice quiet. The words hung in the air, a simple, terrifying, beautiful offer. Stay? It was what I wanted more than anything. But the fear, the old, familiar fear that had been my constant companion for so long, rose up in my throat. What was I doing? I couldn't just stay here. I couldn't just abandon my life, what little was left of it, to hide out in a desert motel with a man I had just met. It was insane. It was irresponsible. "I have to get my car fixed," I said, the words a flimsy excuse. "Gus can come get it," he said, easily dismantling my defense. "He does that." I looked down at the phone, my heart pounding. This was a crossroads. I could pick up the phone, call the mechanic, and in a day or two, I would be back on the road, back to my life of running. Or I could leave the phone on the table. I could stay. I could take a chance on this quiet man and this fragile, unexpected connection. My phone, which I had left charging in my room, buzzed on the counter where I had placed it. The screen lit up with a name. Mark. My ex. The man I had spent 5 years trying to be enough for. The man who had left me with a polite, devastating note on the kitchen table. Cole's eyes flickered to the phone, then back to my face. He did not say anything. He did not have to. His silence was a question. "Which life are you going to choose?" I looked from my buzzing phone to Cole's steady, patient gaze. Mark represented my past. A life of trying to fit in, of hiding parts of myself, of a love that had always felt conditional. Cole, this quiet, grounded man who fixed broken things, represented what? A future? A possibility? I did not know, but I knew what he was not. He was not my past. With a hand that was surprisingly steady, I reached out and picked up my phone. Cole's expression did not change, but I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Disappointment? Resignation? I slid my thumb across the screen and silenced the call. Then, without breaking eye contact with Cole, I powered the phone off completely. The screen went black. The connection to my old life was severed. A slow smile spread across Cole's face. Not the ghost of a smile I had seen before, but a real, genuine smile that reached his eyes, crinkling the corners and transforming his entire face. It was like watching the sun rise. "Good choice," he said, his voice soft. I let out a breath I did not realize I had been holding. The fear was still there, a low hum in the back of my mind. But for the first time, it was overshadowed by something else. Hope. "So," I said, a tentative smile on my own lips. "What does one do for fun in a town with a broken ice machine and a population of 2? Cole's smile widened. He stood up and reached for my hand, his fingers lacing through mine, warm and strong. "I was thinking," he said, his voice a low, suggestive rumble. "We could start by fixing the lock on room 4. It's been sticking." I let him pull me to my feet, my heart feeling impossibly light. Fixing things. It seemed like a good place to start. I had a feeling there were a lot of broken things in my life that could use his attention. And for the first time, I was not afraid to let someone else see the cracks. I was ready to stay. I was ready to be fixed. I was ready to build something new.